this concept of native speakerism is very much entrenched in the English learning culture in China, and it's very much a commercialized product. Wow, where'd you come from? I was like, China. And then, wow, your English is so good. What microaggression is that it could often be in the form of a compliment, but that compliment reinforces cultural stereotypes. The metaverse isn't just VRAR itself. And even though the metaverse is a hype, I think what's important is that we focus on the underlying technologies.
Do you ever feel either like imposter syndrome or...
Everyone else studied engineering and math and computer science, and there's me, the president, saying that like I study education.
Well, likewise, when Cambridge Student Investment Fund president, I study education. And
again, courage isn't about being tough.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. This is the start of a Cambridge week, which is a Thursday for reasons I've still yet to discover. But my guests got up bright and early to be at Clare College. We are both enjoying a flat white in my new spacious room. We are almost at 3,000 podcast downloads yesterday, and if you have been enjoying the podcast discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my socials on Linktree as David Quan. I just cannot thank the guests enough for their courage and insights. I'm excited to introduce my guest today, Xinman or Yoyo. Yoyo is a second-year international student at Homerton College studying education, policy, and international development. Growing up in China, she witnessed these systemic differences between international schools and Chinese public schools, inspiring her to inquire into how education systems can be changed to adapt to an increasingly digitalized and globalized world. Other than education, Yoyo is particularly interested in technology. She's currently the co-head of policy at the Wilberforce Society, which is a think tank, and the president of Cambridge VR AR Society, Virtual Reality and Augmented Reality Society. In her spare time, if she has much, she also enjoys playing the piano and the cello. Yoyo, welcome to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan.
Pleasure to be here.
When did you get up today and how far did you have to travel?
I got up at 7 a.m. today, and then went to the gym, took a hot shower.
Wow.
And then traveled here by bus. By U-Bus, but I realized it's a different college site. Yeah.
That's great. And have you listened to any previous episodes? And if so, who have you listened to? And maybe some of the takeaways you had?
Yeah, I listened to Jesse's, Sal, Mona, Jack, I think. I listened to a bit of Drew, but I haven't finished it yet. Yeah, but yeah, I enjoy the podcast a lot. I think no specific takeaways, but I think it's just generally good to know people more through podcasts and listening to their narratives.
So why do you want to do a podcast episode then?
Because you invited me to.
So why? I did, and I'll tell you my reasons maybe a bit later throughout the episode, but why did you accept the nomination?
I mean, I enjoy deep conversations, and I feel like a podcast is a way of doing so. And also like recording it.
Well, you're an impressive individual, very, very talented, and I don't just mean that by the like intellectual achievement, which again you've done very well in your first year and all the other stuff that you get to do, but I guess one example that was brought to life is this morning when you got here, and we went to get coffee, and you said, can we go back to the store where I got my pastries? But at that point, they hadn't set up their payment system. So therefore, you couldn't pay, but you want to go back there to make sure that you paid. I thought it's a very small thing, but really revealed a lot of your character. And I was very impressed by that, actually.
Oh, cool. No, I felt like that was natural to me because, like, I was gonna go back anyway, and they had coffee, so like, why not just go back? Yeah.
No, that's wonderful, and I commend you on that. So it felt natural to you. So what else feels natural to you?
What else feels natural? I don't know.
No, it's a very broad question, not a great question to start, but we will get to more of a maybe intellectual discussion on virtual reality or augmented reality, which you will probably need to help me out quite a bit because I still need to do a lot more reading in that area. But before then, as you know from other episodes, I'd love to get a kind of some context on how you became who you are, and after we have that childhood context and your intellectual interests, I think a lot of your viewpoints would make a bit more sense.
Right.
So you grew up in China
Yeah.
and went through the entire basically schooling system in China?
Yeah. So I'll start with my kindergarten actually.
Great, right from the start.
So kindergarten, my mom sent me to like this international kindergarten, and so basically there were foreigners teaching me like how to speak English in that kindergarten, and it was just like in this English speaking environment already, so since kindergarten, and then in primary school I went to, it's not exactly like a public school, but they still follow the public schooling system. And then it was just by grade 4 things got really intense. And then I remember there was one night I was only like, how old was I when I was grade 4, like 9 years old, 10 years old, and then I was doing homework and it was 10 o'clock at night already, and then my nose just started to bleed, and then my mom was like, no, you can't stay in this school anymore, it's too intense for you. So yeah, in grade 5 I transferred to an international school, and since then I've always stayed in that school, so yeah, from primary to high school.
That's interesting. I think the most interesting part is actually even from kindergarten your mum sent you to an international school, which suggests that there's this perhaps outlook that, you know, the world is going to be much bigger, and perhaps she wanted you to study abroad. Have you talked to your mum much about the decision to send you to an international school so early on?
That's really true, because like, I mean, I kind of want to approach it from like, you know, like the macro environment of China at that time. So I mean, I grew up in Shenzhen, so that's a city beside Hong Kong, and that's
the
also
Silicon Valley of China, basically.
Yeah, that's like the front runner city of China's reform and opening up policies, which is a lot about like integrating Western values, things like that, opening up to the West, basically. And I mean, living in Shenzhen and the front runner city of that policy, I think it's a lot of exposure to you know, this emphasis of you have to learn English well in order to communicate to the world. So I think that was like the macro environment. And then yeah, my mom is kind of I don't know, she was like right onto it. She was like, you have to learn English well. So yeah, from a very young age, she really stressed learning English well, and sometimes even highlight learning English more than learning Chinese.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, my mom and dad, they're monolingual, so at home we do speak Mandarin, but it's because that they don't know how to speak English. They would really want me to learn how to speak English well.
Do you mind me asking what your parents do? And I guess I just wonder how they got that vision and that kind of focus on prioritizing English.
Right. My mom was an accountant, and then my dad is like, he manages a factory. So not really much. I think it's not really formed by their careers or anything. I think it's just general perception. I mean, my mom, actually my grandpa, he was the first batch who went to Shenzhen. He built Shenzhen. So 1979 was when Shenzhen was founded. And then my grandpa, he went to Shenzhen in, I think, 1982 or something. So basically my entire family grew up in Shenzhen. And I think it's just that macro environment that changed a lot of our perceptions.
How much more do you know about your grandfather going to Shenzhen at the time?
So at that time, Shenzhen was just like a village. And then it was really hard. I don't know much about my grandfather's story, but it's a lot about... Sorry, I have to rephrase this.
That's
I
all
have
right.
to think
Take
about
your
it.
time, yeah.
I mean, just building Shenzhen from scrap, I think. And then at the time, for example, like Shenzhen is a place where, there's a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, and then the houses were literally just flat. And then I remember my mom telling me the stories of like how when the hurricane blew in, they had to hold on to like a pillar or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
And it's really cool talking to them and they like recalling how Shenzhen has built up like so fast in the past 30-40 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So on that night that you had the blood nose and your mum, realised that perhaps a change is needed, do you remember like how you felt about the schooling system in China at the time? I mean, obviously as a 9-year-old, as a year 4, you don't have the conceptual perhaps understanding or the systemic considerations of an education system, but do you remember much about what you were feeling at the time, and in particular your role and your personality or who you are?
Right. I don't think I felt much at the time. So, I mean, it was when I was 9.
Yep.
And then also, I think it's partially because there's a Chinese saying called guāi, which means like a well-behaved child. And then I think from early on, even till when I was 9, I was very much a very guāi kid. And so I didn't really have much thoughts in that. Not until I transferred school, I transferred into the international school, that I realized, wow, like when I look back, like wow, I was just, listening to the teachers all the time, no thinking and like no personal opinions.
So like the banking model of schooling.
Yeah, the banking model of schooling, exactly.
Paulo Freire, is that right? Did he? Yeah.
Yeah, Paulo Freire.
See, the education tripos does teach us good concepts that can be applied. That's really interesting on being a child who's guāi, like in Chinese. Obviously, I speak Chinese and I understand what you're trying to say there. And I guess especially for girls in the Chinese culture, it probably, like parents probably want to make sure that, I guess boys and girls, you want to be well behaved, you listen to teacher, which on a general level, I do agree. I think children should listen and respect the elders and to their teachers, but from the way you say it, it seems like you later on almost like regret, is that the right word, or you feel a bit...
I wouldn't say regret. I would say it was just a transformation. And I think it's a good transformation because, like, I think there's a difference between being principled and being well-behaved. Being guāi in the Chinese sense. So I think being principled means, yes, you do follow the rules and you do play with the rules, but you have your own critical thinking. And then you are like independent in your thinking, basically. But being guāi is, I don't know, it's such a compliment in the Chinese culture. But then I just feel like this term needs to be debunked, because it really emphasizes on like being submissive. And yeah, I think that's the main difference.
Okay, and would you say part of you really wanted to be guāi, that you sacrifice anything, or were there viewpoints that you held back, or were there things that you just perhaps kept going with the flow even though you didn't like it, but you go, well, I need to fit into this ideal?
I think it was really natural to me. Like being guāi was really natural to me. Like everyone called me like 你好乖啊, like meaning like you're so well behaved, you're so cute, things like that. Like I think that was quite natural to me at the time. So I didn't feel like fitting in or anything. So I would say like the concept was kind of like entrenched in me. But yeah, when I went to international school, I mean, my school is an IB school, and they really emphasize on, you know, like the different learner profiles, the 10 learner profiles, being a risk taker, being a thinker, being reflective. And that's actually like the first moment when I realized that guāi is not the only way of defining a person. Yeah.
That's interesting. I guess I agree with you that you can be principled and a good person and well behaved while still also having that critical thinking ability. I guess part of being guāi for you might have helped you be such a talented and accomplished musician, I would assume, because it takes a lot of discipline, especially in those early years, to practice a lot. And given your level, and I've seen some of your performances, there's no doubt that you would have practiced a lot. But when did you start music, and what were your routines in developing your musical talents?
Right. So I started playing the piano when I was 5. And then at the beginning, it's, I think, half an hour every day.
Only half an hour?
That was when I was 5. But then, like, when I got to, like, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, it was, like, 1 to 2 hours per day. And it's, so I would, like, come back home from school and then go straight to the piano, practice for, like, 1 or 2 hours, and then dinner, and then homework. And my mom specifically scheduled it that way, because she knows, like, I will finish all the homework, because I'm guāi. And then that's why she put the homework to the end. And because, like, practicing the piano isn't something that I need. Like, there's no deadline to it. There's no it's not that compulsory. But then homework is compulsory, and she knows that I'll finish all the homework. So that's why she always made me play the piano first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And did you see a teacher at the time for piano?
Yeah. I had my first teacher. I followed her for like 6 months, I think. And then I switched to another teacher. But I couldn't really remember what happened back then.
So yeah. She basically failed her internship. Didn't get that returning job offer to teach you. Okay. And did you enjoy piano? Because lots of, I guess, kids, for very good intentions from parents, and I'm a big believer in music education and getting kids exposed almost early to these extracurricular activities. I feel like they add a different dimension to one's life, and it's much easier learning something the younger you are, and to build that foundation. Did you always enjoy piano?
I think I genuinely enjoyed it. I mean, there are always times when I'm like, I just don't want to practice. Yeah, there are times, and then like, for example, like a certain technical skill that I just couldn't get over, and then I mean, there are breakdowns. Did cry, but I think now I just really enjoy it, and I'm grateful for this experience. Yeah.
And were you taking grades, or what were the kind of goals of piano, or did you have school performances that you always kind of, you know, what were the external kind of factors that helped you to practice and stay disciplined?
So my piano teacher, she has quite a lot of students. So every month, I think, she would hold like recitals for the students to perform, like an informal recital. But also I was pursuing the ABRSM grades, and yeah, I got ABRSM grade 8 piano
Wow.
in 2015. So that was when I was, I can't do maths. 12 years old. No, is it 2015? I forgot.
When are you born?
2003.
Okay.
Yeah.
12, 13.
12, 13 years old.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow. So you're grade 8 at 12.
Yeah, I think when I was grade 6 or something. Like, I mean, year 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I also did piano, and it was my main instrument, almost like my identity at the start. And so I started with grade 3 in year 3, and then I did grade 4 in year 4, grade 5 in year 5, and it was like one of the things I took pride of was like, every year I'm going to do a grade.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, after getting like grade 8 piano examinations done, I think I just genuinely enjoy playing the piano. I don't see it as like a goal to pursue or something. But yeah, I also picked up cello when I was 11, I think. And yeah, I enjoy playing it a lot.
Piano is one of those instruments where, sure, you can play an ensemble, but most times it's just alone. And cello, I guess, is more of or you can also play it individually, but it's also like, you know, you can play an orchestra and ensemble. What distribution between individual and group have your musical journey been so far throughout your life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, yeah, for playing the cello, it's mostly in orchestras. I mean, I first picked up the cello. I mean, my name is Yoyo, and then my mom named me Yoyo because of Yo-Yo Ma, a great cellist. So I was like, and back in in my international school, in our music class, we were given a choice to pick either violin or cello. So I was like asking my teacher, Mr. Malini, I was like, can you please allocate me the cello? Like, I want to play the cello. Yeah, and that's how I started playing the cello. And I think in terms of the distribution between playing individually and playing as a group, I think cello has always been a way to socialize, I think. In orchestras, I was in the school orchestra and also in the Shenzhen Youth Symphony Orchestra. Yeah.
I always thought you were named Yoyo for the toy, but maybe not.
No.
That makes a bit more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it was because of Yo-Yo Ma. Yeah.
And did she tell you that, like, when you were quite young, why you were named Yoyo?
Yeah. I remember there's like a kindergarten like reading piece that we did, and it was on Yo-Yo Ma, and then my mom was like, that's why I named you. Yeah, back in kindergarten. Yeah.
Right. And now that you're a bit older and you have lived a year in the UK outside of China, Any general thoughts on education in China? And give you a broad one.
I think in terms of public schooling systems, still it's quite like the fairy model of like the banking system. But I think increasingly they're changing it and they're adapting it quite fast. So, like for example, in universities, they're opening up a lot of majors targeted at new tech. So it's really much keeping up with the changing world, and I really like that. So for example, I think one of the universities opened up like a Metaverse technical major or something. So I find that quite cool. But I think K-12 public schooling system, especially with the guāi at the end, it's still quite, how do I say? Yeah, it's still like the banking model where the students have to absorb all of those knowledge and memorize all of this knowledge. Yeah.
In your bio, you mention the systemic differences between international schools and Chinese public schools, and I guess that is basically what you were just saying about the difference in expectations, which leads to a difference in routine. We can't live a parallel life, but do you think, had you gone through the public schooling system, how, in what ways do you think you might be different at this point in time? Just as a thought experiment.
Yeah, I think I would continue to be guāi and like well behaved and being like a very hard worker.
Which you still are hardworking.
Yeah, but hardworking in a different way, I think. I think, I don't know if, because I'm a really slow learner, actually. And that's why I'm hardworking. But I felt like if I were in the Chinese public schooling system, I would have been like very stressed about like the competitions and the just the larger learning environment is more competitive, and that would really stress me out, because I wouldn't have the space to pace my own learning journey. But yeah, I would never know like what my parallel life would be like.
That's really interesting. I guess what you said just then about your style of learning and what suits you reminds me of what Albert Einstein's kind of famous quote, like, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Do you feel like being in that environment and seeing firsthand the differences had influenced your decision to study education? Because we both study the same course, and we often, I'm sure you do as well, get asked, well, why education? And it's obviously not a simple answer, but was there a particular, or was it just a general experience, a thing that moved you to steer in the education direction? Because I would have almost thought that, given your interest in music, given your interest in technology, that you may have opted for either like music or, I don't know, like a natural sciences role. But why education, which is so humanities and intellectual in that regard?
Yeah, I'm actually I didn't pick music because if I were to do music, I'm not technically sufficient enough to pursue like a music degree. I still think that way, but and also like in terms of like STEM courses, like my math and science isn't that good. I'm just like generally interested in the tech applications and things. But in terms of education, I feel like, yes, it is really much driven by my own experience and just witnessing how, different education systems can shape people so differently. and the way they think so differently. So I think that was like a main driver of why I study education.
You mentioned you listened to Jessie's episode, and you may recall our discussion about storytelling.
Yeah.
You, I believe, founded a English storybook club in high school, and I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a bit more on that.
Right. Back in grade 9, I started an English storybook club. It's called Evereads. So I started it with my high school friends. There were like 8 of us originally. So what we do is every 2 weeks, on a Sunday, we go to like a local library and we teach local students, like we read storybooks to them and teach them English. That was like sort of like a service activity that we did, and we really enjoyed it.
And, what kind of stuff was read?
So in each session, we would pick a storybook, and then we would come up with questions, discussions beforehand, and then we'll also come up with like fun activities beforehand, and then deliver that session to the children. Like I think each session we had like 15 to 20 kids, and then it was just us reading the storybook to them. Sometimes we would have them read them aloud, but I think it's just our mission was, because like a lot of Chinese kids, they perceive learning English as, they perceive English as a subject to study, and a lot of things need to be memorized. But then what we want to do is to change their perception of English from something to memorize, something to study, to an actual tool that changes their perception of the world.
How old were you?
How old
were you at that time?
Grade 9, so I think 15, 16.
So even at 15, 16, you were already thinking about how other people learn and perceive a whole different language and world and the implications that have?
I think I didn't really start it off with that mission, but then throughout the years, I mean, this was done throughout my high school years. I think throughout the years, I slowly realized how important that is, the change of perceptions. And then we just really steered our service towards that mission.
One of the terms you brought up in one of our conversations of the podcast is native speakerism. What does that mean?
So native speakerism is sort of this belief, upholding the view that the best English teachers are the Western teachers, the foreign teachers, and I felt like I've really much been through that. I mean, like throughout my kindergarten years, and then in international schools, I was always taught by Western teachers, and even though that we did have Chinese teachers in our school, they were sort of like treated at like a lower status. I wouldn't say like a very distinctive social status or anything, but if you look at their wages, the Western teachers, they get a lot more to say in classes, and I think native speakerism is sort of damaging in a way, because they measure how well you teach, not by your technical linguistic capabilities. Instead, they measure it by your cultural background
and how you look.
Yeah, so that was something I came across for my coursework for LCL last year, and I just found that really interesting.
Fascinating. And yeah, wow, that's when I think about it, it's true. I mean, in Chinese, you say the term 老外, like as
Yeah,
in,
老外, yeah. Yeah.
or 鬼佬, as
Yeah.
in like, oh, if they're a foreigner, then they must be almost perfect in them. I guess when I think about in the Western world, if they want to learn Chinese, it also makes sense to have a Chinese teacher, but there's so much assumption within it that is probably more nuanced than that in reality.
Yeah, but I think this concept of native speakerism is very much entrenched in the English learning culture in China. So, and it's very much a commercialized product, I think. So for example, back in kindergarten, my mom would go to Hong Kong, and then she would buy me these like CDs and DVDs. And then how they advertised those CDs and DVDs is that they would say it's spoken in standard English accent. It's imported from 进口, like imported from the West, things like that. And then because my mom, she didn't know how to speak English, or like she did know a bit, but she can't pronounce it perfectly. And then what she would do is she would play the CD and then stop it after like every sentence is read out, and then have me imitating the CD instead of she reading the story to me. So I was really much influenced by that culture of native speakerism, and really, I don't know, it's just, and I really much, valorize it, I think. Like throughout my childhood, I would just think, if I can pronounce it as perfectly as those native speakers, then I'll be like, people will compliment me, things like that. So it really reinforced my perception of, speaking English well. And yeah.
So instead of her reading out the story, she would play the CD, which is supposedly the perfect standard English pronunciation, and you as a guāi baba would go, well, okay, let's imitate that so I can speak as normal and as well at that. And that was very much the mindset of you and perhaps many other Chinese children growing up in that circumstance.
Yeah. Throughout my childhood, even when I came to international schools. Yeah.
You also, when we discussed it, you also touched on microaggressions. Yeah,
I think that sort of stems from native speakerism as well. So like when I first came to Cambridge, like in Freshers Week, one of the things that people say to me a lot when they first met me was like, wow, where'd you come from? I was like, China. And then, wow, your English is so good. And then at that time, I mean, I still perceived it as like a genuine compliment. But then it wasn't until that I went to like a racism workshop that I realized that's actually a form of microaggression. So microaggression, it can be very subtle, and the person who said it might not even realize. But what microaggression is that it could often be in the form of a compliment, but that compliment reinforces cultural stereotypes. So, for example, when people compliment me that my English is really good, what's underlying that logic is the Chinese population. When they speak English, they are not good. Like, they are an inferior population in that sense.
That's really interesting. And I mean, I've got compliments compliments in inverted commas. Oh, you're so tall for an Asian, or you're great at basketball for an Asian.
Yeah. So I think it's really...
Or you speak well, or, oh, you are pretty open as an Asian. Like, people just feel the need to add for an Asian, for a Chinese at the end. And I have noticed it as well, and it almost bothers me a little bit. And
Yeah.
I mean, I thought a lot about, recently with the Stop Asian Hate, and when you think about, like, Asians are known to be model minorities. If I asked you now to think about an Asian man, picture an Asian man, chances are you're going to think about this guy with glasses who very good at math or physics, that kind of stuff. And it's not always a very healthy or accurate, in fact, depiction of the diversity of any population.
Yeah.
And even when Asians do well, academically well, you're meant to do well. Of course, you're meant to play the piano and violin and be good at math and all that kind of stuff. And people often cite, Asians earn the most and therefore they're not disadvantaged. But these kind of microaggression are not always measured or able to be measured. Or even when you pointed out, like I said just then, people will point, well, you're not disadvantaged at all. Look, you guys are earning money, you got all of that kind of stuff. And have you thought much about the Asian stereotypes given the past few years of moving countries to you and COVID and Stop Asian Hate movements?
I think I'll start with my personal view and my personal experience. With microaggressions, it's kind of denigrating in a way that I think in both ways. So, like, on one side, you have, for example, when people compliment me, they're actually perceiving me as an exception from the Asian community. So, like, for example, you speak English exceptionally well, like, that kind of logic. So that really distances me away from my Asian community in a certain sense. But if you look at it from the other way, they're like, yeah, the underlying logic is like that the Asian community is inferior, like being like stereotyped into certain rigid views. Yeah.
That's great. It really touches a chord with me. If you look at my whiteboard there,
yeah,
and at the top you can see the word stereotypes, and I've got that crossed out. And the reason why I put it there is very much for the reasons that you said. Actually, all the things you said about being guāi, being submissive, of Asians having, not having as much respect, of being pushovers, and I crossed it out to remind myself that it is not my responsibility or your responsibility, our individual responsibility to fit into necessarily what another culture perceive us to be inferiors.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a podcast about me, but when I think about, my involvement in the union and taking on leadership roles and some of the comments I've got throughout my presidential campaign, that's why it's on my board, where it's such an issue that doesn't get talked about, or even if it's mentioned, it's so easily brushed away due to the model minority myth. And when you think about have you heard of the bamboo ceiling?
I've heard of the glass ceiling.
Glass ceiling. So for Asians, it's the bamboo ceiling. And, long story short, at analyst level, say in the corporate world, there are so many Asians, but as you go up and up and up,
right,
there are no Asians. And part of that is perhaps straight up discrimination, but also part of it is the way lots of Asians have been brought up of being submissive. And when they think about leadership in the Western context, they don't think of us, and that's an implicit bias of being leaders. And I think it's an area that is so fascinating, actually.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, even with different values, we all have everyone has their own personal values and cultural values, but I think it's important to make sure that your values are only there to guide you. Your values are not there to judge people. I think that's a quite an important mindset to take on.
do you have any advice for almost like 16, 17-year-old teenagers in China who are perhaps going to move overseas, and how to flourish and take on the challenges that they'll inevitably face in a Western society?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to put yourself out there. A lot of times it's not just, actual, like, it's not just the judgments that you receive. Like, oftentimes we don't receive these judgments. It's our own perception of ourselves that's like stopping us from moving forward. A lot of times we are afraid of going out there and presenting ourselves. But honestly, if you just like step out, you'll realize that people are actually quite, welcoming and open-minded about your identity, your culture. So I think as long as you overcome that cultural barrier in your own mind, it's just easier to move on from that step.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to move on to technology and AI and or VR and AR. You wrote 13 in-depth article on VR, AR, Metaverse, and AI-related tech firms that got published on, WeChat accounts and got like 55k views, which promoted a lot of community-wide discussion. And clearly you've done a lot of research on that. Where did that interest stem from? And can you give us a brief maybe overview on what the industry or the sector looks like at this point in time from your perspective?
So my original interest in VR AR stemmed from education, actually. So I'm interested in edtech and looking at how, like the relationship between education and technology, because I see it as like education as a slow force that pushes the society, and then technology as a relatively fast force, a rapid force that's changing the world. So I've just been pondering a lot about, like the relationship between these two forces. But yeah, I got into, I'm interested in edtech, and I feel like VR AR is like a very, like they have a lot of potential in edtech. So for example, imagine a history class where children no longer need to memorize, all the historical facts. Instead, they're like immersed in this virtual environment, immersed in that actual historical moment. And that really helps them to build their empathy and their way of looking at the world. So I think that's how I initially got into VR AR.
And how much has the industry or technology evolved in that space, and what is kind of the trajectory? Is it an exponential improvement at the moment, or quite linear, or has it reached a point of stagnation?
So if you look at VR AR, it first started in like 2010 to 2012, and then in 2014 there was like the Oculus Quest, and that was like a huge hype. But if you look at any technology, there's a Gartner hype cycle for a lot of technologies, and what the Gartner hype cycle says is that any technology from conception, it will move towards like inflated expectations, and that's like the hype, and then they will drop to a trough of like disillusionment, and then from then on the technology will slowly mature and then become more widespread and be adopted by the wider community. So I think VR AR now, it has gone over the hype and gone over the trough, and now it's slowly maturing. you see for example, Oculus MetaQuest 2, it has a lot of it's like in the 2C market, in the consumer market, it's quite widespread already. But also I think what's more important is not only the consumer side but also the industrial side. So a lot of applications have already been made in the industry. So in terms of like healthcare, in factories, in product design, a lot of VR AR has been implemented.
How do you personally go about learning about this space, when there is so much information, so much hype, so much misconceptions, and like I asked also out of personal curiosity because I hear these terms, but I almost feel a bit worried whether I am capable or competent enough, and maybe that's back to the stereotypes. Like, how have you actually stepped foot into this space so confidently and committing yourself to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we cannot, because like right now we really have the metaverse hype, and I do think it is a hype, but we cannot equate VR and AR to metaverse. So the metaverse isn't just VR AR itself, and even though the metaverse is a hype, I think what's important is that we focus on the underlying technologies. So not just VR AR, but also, network, 5G, computing power. I think these are the technologies that is going to have a real impact to the world in the future. And the metaverse, the hype. The metaverse is there as like a distant lighthouse that these technologies are working towards. But whether if we ultimately achieve the metaverse in, I don't know, 10, 15 years, we don't know. And a lot of people are critical about it. But I think it's good to focus on what we have now, which is the technologies developing. So I think putting the focus on the current technologies instead of the future conceptions. Yeah. Despite that, the future conceptions are important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know that I remember reading your application for the Cambridge Student Investment Fund last year, actually, and one of the things that you mentioned is that the emerging discussions on Web3 and Metaverse are not just hot topics that generate speculative growth, but rather embedded in companies' actions, visions, and products. Do you have any concrete examples?
Yeah, I mean, Meta, like, it changed its name from Facebook to Meta, and that's very much embedded, like the concept of metaverse, like embedded. And then recently, I think just 2 days ago, there's a Meta Connect, so like a series of presentation on Meta's new products and vision. And then what's interesting is that they cooperated with Microsoft. So now Microsoft is very much helping with the software part, and then the software parts of like VR, AR, and Meta is like building these industry partnerships on both hardware and software. So, I went back to China over the summer, and then literally everyone is talking about Metaverse. Not everyone, but like, but like everyone knows about it. It's a very hot topic.
What's the Chinese?
元宇宙.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it is very much embedded into visions, and even now, I think a lot of tech companies, they're starting to have positions called the chief metaverse officer, things like that. So these are the people who come up with metaverse strategies, to help the companies to, advance in this technological world.
Where do you see yourself amidst all of this innovation and growth, given your background?
Is it education? Yeah. No, actually, it's really funny because, like, I'm the president of the VR Air Society. And then when I introduce myself, I'm like, yeah, I'm the president and I study education. And then people are like, everyone else studies engineering and math. So we just held a social like a few days ago. Everyone else studied engineering and math and computer science. And there's me, the president, saying that like I study education. But
well, likewise, when Cambridge Student Investment Fund president, I study education, and everyone else has got their finance, economic, business.
Yeah.
Which again, it shows for anyone, I guess, contemplating study in the UK, it doesn't matter what degree you study, and I would almost argue, and I think you agree with me because we've talked about this quite a lot, it is about the development of transferable skills.
Yeah.
And education or any degree at Cambridge gives you basic abilities to read, to write, to synthesize information, to think critically, to communicate. And with those skills, it's not unfeasible to go into these industries and bring it almost a diverse and a unique viewpoint to it, actually.
Exactly. Because, like, I mean, I have no STEM background knowledge in any way. Like, despite Metaverse and Web3 and all of these technologies, they're very technical. But then I feel like technology cannot advance without social, cultural discussions. So, for example, if you look at, Web3, there's actually a lot of social and even political implications and ideologies behind that. So I find that really interesting, and it's really, really important to draw on multidisciplinary perspectives into the area of tech, into the area of finance, for example.
You mentioned, which I think is very true, that it's hard to see the technical growth alone without considering the cultural nuances, and with that, I guess, brings ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
What are some of the ethical or cultural considerations that have been intellectually stimulating for you?
I think, for example, Web3, it's this idea of everything needs to be decentralized. So I mean, just background knowledge. So like we have moved from Web 1 to Web 2, and then now we're moving towards Web 3. So Web 1 is like when we could only read things from the internet and we couldn't interact. And Web 2 is when we can read and contribute. So, like with user-generated content, with, like Instagram, Facebook, we post things ourselves. But essentially these data, it's owned by big tech companies. But then moving towards Web3, there's an increasing number of voices saying that these needs to be decentralized. Everyone should own their own data, basically. But then, like, I mean, I'm also like liaising and writing a paper for the Wilberforce on, decentralization in Web3. It's really interesting to see how, like, we're questioning whether decentralization is really possible, both technically, but also socially. So, yes, like, perhaps with crypto technology and with blockchain, Web3 decentralization is technically possible, although we're not exactly there yet. But is it socially possible? Because, if we look at human history everything has been organized in some form or another that like that has hierarchies, like different, like hierarchical organizations has been a core part of our history. So we're like intellectually thinking about whether decentralization, like complete decentralization, is possible or not. Yeah.
You love this topic, right?
I do love this topic. And I have to admit, like, I'm not very professional, or like I'm not an expert in this topic at all. I'm still like, I'm just tuning in. I still have no I don't really have a lot of knowledge in like crypto and like Web3 and things like that, but it's fun to tune into these different tech topics.
I cannot believe that the president does not know everything about this topic. How disappointing. He should resign.
I know. I feel like yeah, even like for this year VR AR Society, we're thinking of doing more actual VR AR software development projects. But then I don't have any coding skills. But as I said, I feel like as long as I have the skills to organize these, it's good. Our secretary, he's like a PhD student in immersive technology, so he's helping me with all the tech sites. Yeah.
When you work with people who are very technical, which again, I want to stress that just because someone studies something technical doesn't mean they know everything about the field, and also just because someone appears confident doesn't mean they're necessarily that competent, and we all have something to add. But do you ever feel either like imposter syndrome or lack of confidence or self-doubt, like in this area, like
Very much. I think in the past, I think I'm overcoming this slowly, the imposter syndrome. What I realized is, I think imposter syndrome it's essentially complacency and fear as two sides of the same coin. I see it that way. So like when we think of imposter syndrome, we usually associate it with, like inferiority complex. But in reality, I feel like imposter syndrome is this blinded overconfidence that makes you fear making mistakes, that makes you fear failures. So I think realizing that is really important. So I think now my mindset is this rookie mindset. Like, I'm admitting that I'm just a rookie. And by admitting that I'm a rookie, I'm no longer an imposter trying to, to present myself as someone that's like an expert in this area. When I say I'm just a rookie, I sort of allow myself the space for mistakes, but that's also allowing myself the space for growth.
What are some of your habits, like concrete? I don't just mean like attitudes of humility, which is again really important as a general framework, but what practically do you do to learn and to upskill? Like perhaps it's your use of Notion, which I have seen your dashboards. Perhaps it's a routine that you have by waking up so early and going to the gym. But what do you take pride of in terms of how you spend your time?
I think, well, people think I'm like a highly disciplined person, and I'm like courageous and I'm gritty, but actually, like, it's none of that. I think when you if you read Atomic Habits, I think it's really turning those habits, and I mean when it becomes a habit, it's no longer a chore. It's something intrinsic in you. So for example, like just waking up early in the morning and going to the gym, it just feels natural to me. If I don't go to the gym, I'll feel like this day is just not as good sometimes. But then I don't go to the gym every day. I sort of allow myself the flexibility. But I think when you turn it into a habit, it's something that's much more intrinsic. And even with, for example, being courageous, being gritty, I think these are, like going back to character education. And I think these terms needs to be deconstructed, debunked, because I think being a risk taker and overcoming imposter syndrome, it's not about being tough. A lot of times it's about being vulnerable. So and accepting your vulnerability. But when we say that we need to be gritty or be courageous, we're sort of signing up ourselves to those characters that's actually contrary to our nature. I don't know how to phrase it, but I don't know if you get what I mean.
Well, the word courage has come up quite a few times. What does courage mean to you, and can you give me, well, given that you touched on vulnerability as well, do you have a defining, significant, turning point where the themes of courage and vulnerability for you really came out? And
I think over just the past year, I've really realized that, courage isn't about being tough. It's about being vulnerable and accepting that vulnerability. And how I came to realize this is that, I'm a normal person. I also have breakdowns and things, but then it's really funny because whenever I break down, I just cry in my own room, and then afterwards I journal down thoughts. But then in the past, I would usually tell myself, okay, it's fine to break down. You're getting stronger. You're growing up. I always tell myself that. But then increasingly, I realized that it's fine to not push yourself so hard. It's fine to admit that you're vulnerable. And it's when we really admit that we're just ordinary, we're just vulnerable, I think that's when we really became stronger.
Am I talking to Yoyo or Brene Brown? I just cannot tell the difference. No, that's brilliant and very good, comforting message, especially for high achievers like yourself who feel a pressure to constantly perform and to achieve. And
no, actually not.
You don't.
I don't I genuinely don't feel like I have to, especially in terms of academics. I don't have specific goals in my mind. For example, I never say to myself, I need to get a first or I need to get an IB45.
But you did.
But I think that mindset is actually quite important. And I realized that because, I think I used to have a really, have high goals for myself. So, I had to take the SAT. And then
1550.
No, but that was actually the third time I took it. I got 50-50, but but the first time I took it, I was like, when I was taking the test, I was like, I need to get a 1500 or above. During the test, I was like, I need to get this score, and then it turned out to be 1370. So it was really bad. And then I think it's just I need to change that mindset from focusing on the end result to focusing on the process. So after that, after I got 1370, I was like, you know what? I'm actually gonna try to enjoy this process of prepping for SAT. I'm actually gonna genuinely learn and improve on my math and comprehensive skills. And then I think it's so much more important to focus on the process itself. And that's why from then on, I never give myself, like a certain fixed goal. Instead, I really much focus on the process, and my only goal is to try my best in the process. Yeah.
We can talk all day about that attitude, and it's really fascinating. But for the listeners, what can you give a few resources that they can maybe go explore themselves in, like resources that have really helped you, such as Atomic Habits by James Clear, as you mentioned. What else other than my podcast, of course, which is the ultimate source of...
Definitely. I think Ali Abdaal as well. He's actually an alumni from Cambridge, graduated from Emmanuel College, a big YouTuber, actually came to the union. So Ali Abdaal. And what else? I think Adam Grant.
Ooh, I love Adam Grant.
I really like his book, Give and Take.
No way, you've read it. That was one of my favourite books, actually.
I love that book.
I love in particular how he splits up people as givers, takers, and matchers, and exploring the roles of each. And when after his research, he notices, like, in all these different professions, givers, takers, matchers, who does the best and who does the worst, and the people who do overwhelmingly the worst are the givers, and that reinforces the notion that, nice guys finish last and all that kind of stuff. So you would assume that, maybe the takers or the matchers climb up on top, and the striking finding that he found was that the people who actually do the best are also givers. So at the very top and at the very bottom, they're both givers. And what separates the givers who excel and the givers that sink are the doormat effect, where, the givers that don't do well are the ones that get abused because they don't set boundaries, because they don't recover properly, because they don't have an element of critical thinking of who they help. Whereas the givers that succeed are the ones that, for example, understand the effects of batching, instead of scattered acts of kindness, having maybe a full day to volunteering, so that you're wholly committed to a cause and you give in a very smart way. But also the role of matches I found was really fascinating, where, matches are, I think you mentioned, like karma polices. Yeah. Givers, when they give out stuff, the matches who go, I actually, for a bit of context, givers are people who give without expecting much to return.
Yeah.
Takers are the ones who approach every interaction by going, let's try claim as much value as I can get. The matches are like, if you give to me, I'll give to you.
An eye for an eye.
Yeah, an eye for an eye. And the matches serve as a karma police, because when givers help matchers realise it, and they pay the favour back. Whereas for takers, once a matcher identifies you as a taker, then they're going to do whatever they can to make sure you get the consequence. But the other important concept is the concept of agreeableness. And that's actually, when you think about the 2x2, you got givers and takers, and then agreeable and non-agreeable.
Yeah.
The easiest people to identify are the agreeable givers. They're the people who are warm, kind, genuinely giving. You just know them, right?
Yeah.
And the other easy group to identify are the disagreeable takers, the nasty, rude, horrible people who you just identify. But the other two combinations are tough, and the most dangerous one is the agreeable taker, which is...
Definitely.
They appear really nice, they look lovely, they perhaps even perform acts of kindness, but obviously their long-term intention is to claim as much value as possible. And the other group is where I, as an education student, basketball coach, leaders have tried to focus a lot on is the disagreeable givers. They appear very hard on the outside. They don't approach very approachable, but they have such a soft heart that they're underappreciated. And
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, for the context, this is the book Give and Take by Adam Grant, but like if you want like a shorter version of it, you can also watch his TED Talk for the audience.
It's brilliant.
It's a brilliant book. And I think that has, like, being a giver has really much ingrained in me. Like, I read this book quite a long time ago. I think when I was like 14, 15.
One other thing, if anyone claims that they're a giver, they're probably not a giver.
No.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay, I'm not a massive taker here. Definitely not. But I mean, just from my experience, because like, I mean, a lot of people approach me for help and things like that. And I, like, in the past, I always, spend my time helping people out. But then I'm also very vulnerable to like burnouts, and that's when I realized I need to set like good, clear boundaries. Because like, I think if we just help anyone without, for example, if someone asked me to write an essay for him, just an example, I think that's when we need to recheck. Because like, if we write an essay for him, it's actually not helping him to improve. What we need to do is like encourage him to write the essay himself, and then maybe we can do the edits. That hasn't happened to me, but that was just like an extreme example. But yeah, I think it's good to set good boundaries, and also it's good to foster an environment where you encourage all the people around you to succeed. So I think this has really, my high school experience has really much impacted me in this way, because like, in my high school, in our year, we only have 16 people in our batch, and it's such a small cohort that everyone is super friendly, and we would like help each other out all the time. And it's really building that community of wanting your peers to succeed, and then in that community it's easier for you to succeed as well, instead of like competing, like like the competitor mindset. Yeah.
It's a legacy-worthy interview, trying to capture a snapshot of who you are at this particular point in time, and for you to look back on in 10, 20 years' time. Before I go on to my final few questions, are there anything else you want to be included in this recording, Yoyo? Or do you think we've captured a lot about your life and your attitudes and your intellectual interests so far?
Right. I think maybe just a bit more on my friends. I think.
Feel free to name drop, shout out.
Not name dropping, but like friends in general. Okay, I could name drop, but there are too many friends for me to name drop. But I'm just really grateful for all my best friends. I mean, I have a lot of friends that grew up with me right from kindergarten, so we've been friends for like 16, 17 years now. And these are still my really good friends. And even my high school friends, we have a really close relationship. And I have really close relationships with my high school teachers as well. So I just want to really thank them for being there for me. And yeah.
Great. Some final questions. First one. How does Tendon exhibit his musical philosophy on oneness by integrating Eastern musical elements into Western orchestration in Contrabass Concerto Wolf Totem?
Why did you just like read out my extended essay topic?
You have half a minute to answer this.
It's really interesting. I sort of set out a framework where there's primary, secondary, and tertiary musical elements. So that's something I came up with myself. So I think primary musical elements are, like notes on its own. For example, like the timbre of the notes, how the dynamic of the notes. It's something on its own. And then the secondary musical elements would be when the notes get combined into rhythms and melodies. And then the tertiary musical elements are the larger structures when melodies and rhythms combine into like a larger picture in terms of, the structure of the piece, the texture of the piece. And then how I answered that that question of how Tan Duan, my favorite composer, how he combined Western and Eastern musical elements in his piece is he used primary and secondary musical elements from the Eastern culture, and he combined it into the Western orchestration, which is the larger tertiary musical elements.
Who would you love to have a 1 hour conversation with, alive or dead?
Tan Duan.
And perhaps final question, and I know you've prepared an answer because you listened to multiple episodes, but I'm not going to ask you that because you've already prepared an answer. But what is a question that you wish more people would ask you, and why?
I actually don't know. I have to think about it. That's actually a good question.
I know the question you were expecting is probably like, what's message, quote, or saying you wish every educator would promote and every child would internalize. But I feel like you've touched on a lot of those things. But what is the one question that you wish more people ask you about, and why? Because I feel like in our normal conversations, we always crave to say certain things, and we always crave for us to understand us in a deeper, more nuanced ways. But it's hard to expect everyone to really understand that side about you, and likewise, we probably don't really know what other people want us to ask. So what question or set of questions would you like people to ask you more that allows you to share more of yourself?
I really have to think about this. David's probing me a lot. I think something more related to my daily life instead of like intellectual conversations. I don't know. I actually can't think of any. I don't know. Which anime do you like the most? I just came up with it. Yeah, I mean, this year I've always focused so much on, academia. No, not academia, but my academics and, my extracurriculars and commitments. And then I didn't have a lot of time to, enjoy these, entertainment, things like that. So, last year I started watching anime. I bought myself a Switch and I started gaming. So yeah, you can ask me about what animes I like, what games I like, and I'll be happy to talk about it as well.
I know you had high expectations coming into the podcast. Has it been all right so far?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the podcast.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your time and for coming over this morning. And again, I think you're incredibly thoughtful and very culturally aware and sensitive to the needs of other people in the wider community. And I think you've done very well for yourself, largely through the way you engage with the different opportunities and the way you conduct yourself and the principles with which you hold, you abide by in your daily life. And I hope you know that people respect and admire that about you, and I wish you nothing but the best going forward, Yoyo.
Thank you so